Good evening. How is everybody this evening? Good to see you. Suzanne whispered to me that the very hand will wave actually. Oh, is that opening? Oh, he's 100. But anyway, he was able to go home yesterday. So thankful for that. And I know that they appreciate your prayers. They are a fine, fine young couple. I have a little boy, and he is a typical little boy, but they are really good people. And so we're thankful for that. Little boy went to his grandmama's for the weekend with his mom and dad, and on Saturday night, they were celebrating his grandmama's birthday. And so the little boy looked at his grandmama and said, "Grandmama," he said, "how old are you?" And she said, "Well, honey, I'm 62 years old." And he stopped, kind of looked a little serious, and then he looked at her and he said, "Did you start at 1?" You know, sometimes we feel like that, don't we? Look in Mark chapter 14. We're ready for verse 43. Mark 14, verse 43. We're winding this study down, and we're in the last week, actually, we're in the last hours of the life of Christ while here upon the earth. This is Friday morning, and when I say Friday morning, I don't mean 9 o'clock. This is Friday morning, wee hours before sunrise. That what we're going to talk about tonight pretty much happens. Contextually, let's remember a couple of things. Let's remember that Jesus has told Peter that he would deny him, and Peter denied that he would deny him, which, of course, if we get there tonight, Peter does deny him. But also, Jesus was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and we looked at that a little bit last week. By the way, isn't there a great difference? You stay in Tennessee, love the weather, hate the weather, it doesn't matter, in 5 minutes it'll change. Last week we were freezing cold. You know, the air conditioner, or the heater rather, ran just as hard as it could run, and probably some folks today turned on the air conditioning. I told Suzanne yesterday, I said, if I go anywhere today, and this was yesterday now, mind you, I said, I bet I see some folks in shorts. I did run, well, I had to go to the post office and carry the bulletins to the post office, and I stopped by one other place right quick. She didn't know that. Anyway, I had to go to my favorite place, McKay's. They hadn't seen me in a while. And so I found a few people with shorts on. So, you know, weather changes. But anyway, in Mark chapter 14, verse 43, it says, immediately, Jesus is still in the garden. Jesus has prayed, and immediately, while he still spake, Judas, one of the 12, with great multitude, with swords and clubs, came from the chief priests and scribes and elders. Now remember, we've already seen, Judas made a bargain with the chief priests, and that he would betray our Lord and Savior for 30 pieces of silver, which was the price of a slave in that day and age. And so Judas comes with them. He brings folks with him. He brings a multitude. It's interesting, isn't it? You stop and think about who Jesus had with him. Jesus didn't have a lot of folks with him, right? We studied that last week. But here's a great multitude that comes out with the idea of capturing Jesus. And not only do they have a lot of people, but they have all the sticks and the rods and all that they could carry with them. It's probably a sight, if you will, that they come, and nevertheless, look at verse 44. Now his betrayer had given them a signal, saying, whomever I kiss, he's the one. Seize him and lead him away safely. It is interesting. There's a contrast. Did you catch it? A contrast, at least for me, is verse 43, great multitude, swords and clubs. 44, seize him and lead him away safely. The word seize doesn't mean, we think of seize, it's grab and grab quickly. The word seize here is the idea of to take hold as to at least be in charge of. But it's not the idea of just grabbing and grabbing quickly, but it's just grab so that you are the one over him, but do it safely. Kind of an interesting contrast. Why did Judas do all this? Who knows? I mean, the scriptures don't tell us. John 12, John seems to indicate that maybe Judas was a thief, and so maybe Judas did it for money. It seems as if, though, at least in my mind, Jesus, if you remember back a chapter or so ago in Mark, Jesus rebuked Judas. And when he did, it seems as if, especially if you read John's account, that it was at that point in time that Judas went out. And so maybe that's what it was. Judas didn't like criticism. I don't know. I'm not saying that's the answer. I don't know the answer. And I don't think we can really just say because scriptures don't tell us. But Judas betrays Jesus. Now notice what's the signal? What is the signal? It's a kiss. Now isn't it interesting? Where does he kiss Jesus? Mark doesn't tell us, but John does. On the cheek. Wonder why he said that he would kiss him on the cheek. Well, let's think about several different possibilities. Let's think about, first of all, the fact that he's going to kiss Jesus because Jesus is in this small little crowd, admittedly. Bigger crowd has come. And it's dark. It's dark. And so there needs to be some way, because Jesus is dressed like everybody else. I mean, he looks like everybody else. He doesn't look different. And I'm sure he doesn't have a neon sign over his head saying, "Hey, it's me, come get me." Yeah, he didn't have a glowing halo. No, he didn't. Didn't have a glowing halo. And so there's part of the reason why there had to be a signal, or could have been a reason why it had to be a signal. But think about, he kissed him on the cheek. This is a kiss of a friend to a friend. If you're going to greet your friend, I don't have kissing friends. Don't want any, really. Got my wife. That's enough. But, I'll hug my friends. Now, I'm a hugger, but I'll kiss my wife, and that's enough. And my grandbaby. But this kiss is what we would consider a friendship kiss, a kiss on the cheek, just a friendly kiss. So Judas comes really disguised and kisses Jesus. But Jesus knows what's going on. Jesus knew why he was there, what he was headed for, what was happening. And so he says, seize him. Yeah. What's that?
It's just like, okay, so we've got a crowd of people.
Huh.
We don't know how big that crowd is.
All right.
But it says they had stores in club.
Yeah.
That kind of leads you to think they weren't really here. It's like they grab something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you kind of think, well, we just got paid, so this is somewhat organized. But here it doesn't appear to be. And maybe that's where the kiss came in. It's like, okay, what I'm going to do.
Right.
Know,
yeah.
But nobody else is really going to know what's going on.
That's right.
So I just wonder how chaotic it really was.
I think it was to a degree because, like you say, think about this from a standpoint of time compression. All this is going on. We read it. We read 2 paragraphs last week, and then we spent a week thinking about it, and then but we've jumped from thing to thing, from event to event, and so I see it as being somewhat chaotic in my own mind because of the time frame. Anything else? Verse 45. And as soon as he had come, immediately he went up to him and said to him, "Rabbi, Rabbi," and kissed him. So he greeted him. He greeted him as, he probably would anyway. "Teacher, teacher." And he kissed him. And they laid their hands on him and took him. One of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. It doesn't say who in Mark's account, but it does in John's account. Who pulled the sword? Peter. Peter was, you ever done a character study on Peter? I mean, just individually, I'm sure preachers have here, but you ever just found all the verses that talk about Peter? He was the one that he always spoke up first. He was brash. He was bold. He evidently lacked a little bit of humility. Because remember last week, as the Lord said, Peter, you're going to deny me? And he said, no, I'll never deny you. I'll never walk out on you. I'll never turn my back on you. I'll always be there for you. And it comes back to bite him. But Peter pulls out a sword, more than likely, and we think of swords, but more than likely it was a short sword. They carried what we would really liken into, knives, small knives. Not pocket knives, but small knives. A lot of times they carried them, and they carried them on their inner thigh. They strapped them on their inner thigh, concealed weapon, if you will. And they could pull them out quickly, and Peter pulls his out and cuts off the ear. Do you remember the name of the man that cuts off? Malchus, servant's ear, yes. And so the Lord, of course, heals it. Now, and I want you to think about this. The Lord heals that ear. Here's a crowd that's coming to get Jesus. They've heard, a lot of them have heard. And what it is they're worked up. They're worked up. The Sanhedrin Council is upset. They considered Jesus a blasphemer. They considered him a false teacher. And they also considered him a threat. And they needed to get rid of him. And they not only needed to get rid of him, but they infused this feeling of we've got to get rid of him to all people. Now, there is a large gathering at Jerusalem at this point in time. Why? Because what's going on? Passover. And so there's a large crowd, and they're working on, the Sanhedrin's working on these Jewish folks. Hey, this Jesus, he's false. He's character. He's an imposter. You don't need to listen to him. You don't need to give heed to him. We need to get rid of him. And so, as they come, they see this. They see Peter cut off his ear and Jesus take it up and place it back upon the man's head. You wonder, we all wonder sometimes, how much it would take. How much would it take to convince somebody? This crowd saw this miracle, and they weren't convinced. Why? Well, sometimes we get things in our head, and you can't change them. Psychologists tell us this. If I were to call you tomorrow, completely anonymously, but if I were to call you tomorrow, and I were to say, okay, I'm taking a survey, and I need to know what's your favorite color. And let's say you haven't thought about that. Now I realize you have, because you probably have a favorite color. But it's something especially that you haven't thought about. Maybe if I were to ask you, I know this is controversial, but let's just say, maybe if I was to ask you in the next election cycle who you're going to vote for, let's just say mayor. Let's just make it, try to make it the least controversial as possible. Who you going to vote for as mayor? Yeah. Who you going to vote for dog catcher? I was trying to stay out of it. Who you going to vote for dog catcher? Let's say there's two people running. Let's say we know two people. There's person A and person B. And I say, okay, who you going to vote for dog catcher? And you really hadn't thought about it. Maybe you really don't care. And I say, no. In order to complete this survey, you have to tell me either A or B. Now, psychologists tell us that you'll choose one, and whoever you choose, you will defend them till the end. This is your choice, because you've made that choice. You've made up your mind. You've made that choice. and you won't hardly give in to anything that's said about them. Well, that's a little bit, at least in my thinking, of what's going on here. They've made their decision. We want to get rid of Jesus. And so nothing that they saw or did could get them to change their mind. Jesus, verse 48, answered and said to them, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to take me? I was daily with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me, but the scriptures must be fulfilled. Think about what he says. He says, you've come out like you're getting a robber. You're getting somebody that's a thief. You're getting somebody that's an insurrectionist, somebody that's causing trouble. He said, I really haven't caused any trouble. He says, verse 49, I was daily in the temple teaching. And the implication is, you could have done that there. You could have taken me anytime you wanted to, and you could have taken me there. And there wouldn't have been a problem. But he says, look what he says in the last part. He says, you didn't seize me, but the scriptures must be fulfilled. Jesus understood. Back a few chapters ago, when Jesus made that determination that he was going to go back to Jerusalem. In John's account, it's kind of interesting because when Jesus tells the apostles we're going back to Jerusalem, they speak up and they say, no, can't do that. Well, why not? Because they told you the last time we were there that if you ever came back, they were going to kill you. And Jesus said, look, John, he says, I go that I may die. And Peter says, well, we go with you also that we may die also with you. So Jesus knew. Jesus said, okay, this must happen that the scriptures might be fulfilled. Verse 50, then they all forsook him and fled. Loneliness. All by himself. I was thinking about that today. I was thinking about it for personal reasons, but I thought it interesting. Let's see, where is it? Yes, John 16, verse 32. Indeed, the hour is coming, yes, has now come, that you will be scattered, each to his own, and will leave me alone. And yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. Jesus was never alone. We're never alone. I was thinking, trying to get some thoughts together along those lines, like I say, more personal reasons than anything. But I thought that was a great thought. But here they forsook him and they fled. But Jesus really wasn't alone, but he was alone from the standpoint of people around him. Father was always with him. Verse 51 and 52. 51 and 52 are interesting. Have you ever read them in Matthew or Luke or John's account? They're only found in Mark. Don't know why. Some have said that the one that flees here is John Mark. We don't know that. Some have said that Mark includes this because it was John Mark and he wanted to show that everybody fled and that Jesus was completely forsaken. I don't know. And we don't have a real good reason as far as why this is the only place where it is. But now remember, and one of the fascinating things, and I did this again this morning for myself, is I got down and read, you can read in the chronological Bible, you can read in study Bibles that put them together chronologically. I got down a different Bible of mine, and I just read the events chronologically as the verses were put together from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it's a fascinating story, if you will, and how it weaves in, but there are things that are, say, in Matthew that are not in Mark. There are things that are in John that are not in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And there are things that are in Luke that are in Maybe Luke and John, but not in Matthew and Mark. But Mark's the one that includes this. But it's a story of a young man. Notice what he says, verse 51. Now a certain young man followed him, having a linen cloth thrown around his naked body, and the young men laid hold of him, and he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked. Well, what do you make of that, preacher? Preacher doesn't make anything of it because it's kind of a hard thing and it doesn't fit, to be honest. It doesn't fit in the narrative. But it does say that here's a fella that for whatever reason didn't have on much. And when they grabbed it, he left that. He was ready to get out of there. Reason being, think about this. You got a multitude versus a handful. You got people worked up versus people that understand a little bit. You got people that don't know why, but they're doing what they're doing because they've been told, and you've got a little group saying, we believe Jesus, but we don't understand everything he's teaching. We hadn't grasped all this, and we don't know about this, and we don't know about this dying thing. And this resurrection thing, we really don't understand it. And yeah, we're willing to die for him, but are we really willing to die for him? Right here, right now, on this hill, in this garden. There's a lot of, and you can say, preacher, that all that's supposition, and you are exactly right. But the interesting aspect is that in all of that, when Jesus needed them most, they fled. Why? Well, they got scared. But the lesson to be learned is that we don't need to be running. We're never alone. The Lord has told us that and promised that. Anything else that we can talk about in those verses? Well, how about verse 53? They led Jesus away to the high priest, and with him were assembled all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes. Okay, let's stop right there for just a minute. Let's understand that there are, what is very confusing, two different high priests. There's Annas, who is the serving high priest. He is the high priest that Rome put in 18 BC or AD, 18 AD, and was the high priest from 18 AD to 36 AD. He replaced Caiaphas, his father-in-law. When one begins to put all of this together, Jesus goes through basically 6 trials. Now, the trials weren't week-long trials. These were trials maybe of just 10 or 15 minutes. But he goes through, first of all, and we don't have it here, this is Jesus before Caiaphas. But Jesus goes to Annas. We find that in the book of Luke. Then he goes to Caiaphas, which is right here in Mark's account. Then he is, and with Caiaphas is the Sanhedrin Council. Then the third trial, which is considered a religious trial, is before Caiaphas and mostly the Sanhedrin Council. They then send him to Pilate, and he goes through 3 what we would consider civil trials. So you have 3 ecclesiastical trials, 3 civil trials. He goes to Pilate. Pilate will then send him to Herod, and then he will go back to Pilate again, where he will ultimately be condemned to be crucified. Now, it is in the second of the ecclesiastical trials that we begin in verse 53. Peter, verse 54, followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And it says that he sat with the servants and warmed himself at the fire. I've preached this. I have a series of lessons that I have preached through that's on this last week of the life of Christ. Takes me several months because I try to hit all the highlights. You can preach on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and it's fascinating. I've done it actually twice, and I've enjoyed it both times. It's been a long time since I did it. I think it's about 2005 or 6 last time I did it. But nevertheless, I hadn't really thought about it till today, and I thought, Jesus, it says, is there in the courtyard warming himself by a fire, but he's at a distance. And I've always known the measurements of the courtyard of the temple. But then I thought, what's the square footage of the temple? So I figured it up today. 919,000 square feet. 919,000 square feet. See, the temple, the courtyard, was huge. And so it was conceivable. It was 1,100 feet it was 990 feet on the north, and on the east it is 1,000 feet. On the south it is across, it is 910 feet, and on the west it is 1,100 feet. So you've got, yes, it's not square, by the way. Nothing about it's square. That's like a lot of houses that are built. There's nothing about them square. There's nothing about the temple that's square. The temple is very large. The courtyard of which Peter is in, warming himself at a distance, is very possible because of the size. The chief priest, verse 55, and all the council sought testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimonies did not agree. Then some rose up and bore false witness against him, saying, we've heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I'll build another made without hands. But not even then did their testimony agree. They're looking for witnesses. They're looking for witnesses to find so that they might stand up and they might say something that would condemn Jesus. How many witnesses did they need? Needed 2. That's right. Ken's right. They needed 2 witnesses, at least 2. According to Deuteronomy 17 and verse 6, they needed 2 witnesses. You had to have 2 eyewitnesses to corroborate something, and so they're looking for 2, and they can't find 2 people that stories agree to accuse Jesus of something. And so, while they're looking for all of these false witnesses, now notice, isn't it interesting, because here's what it says in verse 56. Many bore false witness against him. Now, it's one thing to be accused of something. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've done it, but you are accused of it. Have you ever had that happen? I've had it happen. I've been accused of stuff and been found then not to have done it. But when I was accused, man, I was a dog. I could tell you a story that probably wouldn't curl your hair. It curled my hair, and I didn't have any. But it curled it because I was being accused of something, and basically told by one man when I said that is not so, had a man tell me that I was a liar, and just so happened that another man had the copy of the fax that was sent. And he held it up and he said, Paul's right, it ain't on there. And the man that accused me and then called me a liar, he didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't tell me how nice the guy was or how right I was. He was ready to accuse me. Well, I've had other things like that happen, and I'm sure you have too. Just because these folks were telling stories didn't mean that they were right. And they couldn't find 2 that had the same story. They couldn't find 2, according to verse 56, that their testimonies did not agree. And so, finally, verse 57, They got a couple of folks together and they got their stories right. They got their stories straight. They weren't correct, but they got their stories straight. And notice what they said. We heard him say, I'll destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I'll build another made without hands. Now, I'm not going to say a lot about that because that kind of gets into my sermon a little bit Sunday, but I will say this, that Jesus said that. But in Jesus' thinking and Jesus talking, Jesus was referring to what? His body, right? And they took it as Jesus referring to what? The temple, the building, the actual temple. And so they considered what Jesus said to be blasphemous. Now, if he was a blasphemer, what could be the verdict for him? Capital punishment, right? Death. If you were a blasphemer, if you've blasphemed, you were considered to be worthy of death, according to Leviticus chapter 24 and verse 16. And so, verse 59 says, but not even then did their testimonies agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, saying, do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you? But he kept silent and answered nothing. Again, the high priest asked him, saying to him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Do you remember what prophecy? It said that Jesus would be led as a lamb dumb before his shearers. Do you remember where that came from? Isaiah 53, right? Yeah, Isaiah 53. And so Jesus fulfills prophecy. Matter of fact, it's interesting. I don't know how many of you really know Sellers Crane. Sellers, of course, used to preach at Rivergate. He's retired now. Sellers wrote a 2-volume commentary in the Truth for Today commentary series in the book of Matthew. And in the back of volume 2, I believe it is, Sellers has a list of the prophecies that Jesus fulfilled in his life in the book of Matthew. And it's interesting because this would be, here one of them. That Jesus fulfilled the prophecy of being quiet. Now, Caiaphas, he says, look, you got to answer me. And so he adjures him. He does everything he can. And here's his question. Are you the Christ? Are you the anointed one? The word Christ, Christos, means anointed. Are you the anointed one? The Son of the Blessed? Well, here's Jesus' answer, verse 62. I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. I am. I am. And you'll see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power. So Jesus claims his messiahship. He claims who he is. He claims that he is basically the Son of God. He claims where he's sitting. He's sitting at the right hand of power. And he says, you're going to see him coming with clouds. Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, what further need do we have of witnesses? You see, from a standpoint of the way Caiaphas saw it, Jesus had just admitted to being deity, which was blasphemous, worthy of death. And so he says, we don't need any more witnesses. We've got it. You just admitted to it. They couldn't find any witnesses. So Caiaphas basically just kept, pushing Jesus. And Jesus finally had to answer. And the way he answered was, I'm the Son of God. And so here's what he says. We don't need any witnesses. You've done this. You have heard, verse 64, the blasphemy. What do you think? And they all condemned him to be deserving of death. Then some began to spit on him and to blindfold him and to beat him and to say to him, prophesy. And the officers struck him with the palms of their hands. And so the physical nature of crucifixion really has already begun. It began really in the Garden of Gethsemane when he prayed, but it also continues here as folks that are around him began to slap him, began to taunt him. And as they taunt him, prophesy. The word prophecy or prophesy has 2 or 3 different connotations. Prophecy can be the standpoint of preaching, or it can be the idea of looking into that which is unknown, future yet to be. And so they use it here from the standpoint of they're saying, okay, you can't see who's doing this, but who's doing it? You tell us. And so they're taunting Jesus, trying to make their point, trying to show, well, you just show yourself. Here's the kicker. If in all of this, Jesus had shown himself, where would the problem be? If Jesus had given an answer that was just forthright and out, if Jesus had defended himself, if Jesus had not gone to Jerusalem, if Jesus had not consented to be taken quietly when they came and got him, he wouldn't have fulfilled prophecy, but where would we be? Still needing a Savior, right? But because he did that, he became our Savior. Anything else? Well, I kind of hoped we'd get to the next, but I forget I'm long-winded. Verse 66 through 72, Peter denies the Lord, but we're going to have to stop right there. But Peter denies the Lord. And it's sad to think that Peter would deny the Lord. Peter denies the Lord. There's something that's interesting in Mark's account of Peter's denial of Jesus that's not found in the other accounts too. See if you can figure out what it is, and we'll talk about it next week. Anything else? Well, I thank you for being here tonight. I've enjoyed the class. It's always more fun when you get participation, when you get people talking. And so we will meet Sunday morning. His lesson is found in Matthew. Sunday night's lesson is found in Matthew because we're finishing up our month with the Master. And so we're going to be talking about both sermons have something to do with an ending. And you'll see, but you'll find them within your reading for the week. Anything else? Any other announcements we need? All right. Have a closing prayer.